Last call. 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 Last call.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Last Call with Lauren and Brent. We had a very exciting week of news and some things that I wanted to make sure that we get covered in the show for you guys this week. First, let me just start off the show by thanking everybody who's joining us on Twitch, or if you're streaming on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do so. All of that helps out us over here at Dig Out on America. With us this week, and Brent, I don't know if you want to. Oh, you finally got your shirt.
No, I've had it. I've just never worn it on the show before. I always try and look fancy with my polos and whatever. And today it was like, no, it was a 3-ring circus in my house, and I was like, I'm staying in my t-shirt.
Nice. I busted out the sweats. So we got back from church, and then we went to a volunteer luncheon for our Fresno Pride Parade, and so we'll be volunteering. Me and my family are going to be volunteering for that. But they had a little luncheon for us, and I came home and threw on the sweats. So this is what you get this week. Brent, do you want to introduce our guest for this week? I know we all kind of have a lot of us have fans in the political arena. Like when you're like, I don't know, we all have. You're just like when you're a candidate and you want to emulate other candidates and other people that you look up to. Brent, why don't you? I'll let you go ahead.
I want to say that our guest tonight is one of our favorites, to the point that she is part of our intro. She is right there from prior times we've had her on. We adore Melanie D'Arrigo. I believe I'm saying that correct. If I'm not, please correct me. But we're love to have her back and love having her on because great progressive viewpoints. Everyone knows I'm the moderate. You're progressive. She's very progressive, and I love you both and love all of your viewpoints. And we have different routes to get there, but totally happy that she's on tonight and to talk with us and to talk with people to bring a better conversation out about Democrats.
Melanie, how are things going in the great state of New York?
Oh boy, things are things are wild here in New York. So I'm thrilled to be on tonight to speak with you all. Thanks again for inviting me, and I feel total solidarity with the hoodie. I'm in my sweat. A lovely family weekend. It's a little bit later, of course, on the East Coast, so we're just having a nice casual time tonight. But yeah, things are wild. I don't know if you all know this, but I'm sure you've heard of the magnificent liar George Santos. Well, he is in my.
He lied. He lied.
No, so
is he really?
Yes.
Oh.
So I don't know if you know that.
Let's start. Let's kind of start with that and kind of tell us like a little bit about how did New York kind of get where it is. So like a lot of the congressional races that happened this last cycle in New York, the results were surprising to me as a person who just thinks of New York as this kind of liberal mecca, and this East Coast, kind of educated. How do we get people? What happened to the New York Democratic Party, in that they a didn't get you elected, but b allowed someone like George Santos to get elected?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot went wrong, and that's very obvious. But look, I think the times that we're in, and it's been like this for the last few cycles, people are craving authenticity, which I know is ironic since George Santos somehow eked in. But people want representatives that are running with a purpose, running with passion, running to fight for material change. And I think certainly there were failures, epic failures across the state, but namely right here in Long Island, where we just got obliterated. And it's not really surprising to me. I mean, of course, it's always a shock when you lose so many seats, when you think about New York. But the way New York is structured, it's really all the progressive, politicians are primarily centered in the city. And when you move further out, there tends to be this narrative that Democrats have to go out for the swing voter. We can't be too far to the left. And
Right.
we find ourselves using words like this: too progressive, too far to the left, too radical. But then we stop talking about issues. We stop addressing people's needs. And when we do that, we lose every single time. Because if you don't stand for something, we all know you stand for nothing. And unfortunately, we saw that play out across the state. And now we are, Long Island in particular, my congressional district is the laughing stock of the country. And I hope, although I'm not optimistic, but I hope the Democratic Party has, learned its lesson. We do hear that the D trip will be funneling in quite a bit of money to New York in 2024. But, I haven't seen material change within the structures of the state. And I think that's a big mistake. I think they're doubling down on this strategy of running essentially Republicans on the Democratic line. But, for
How,
better. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
just like, well, just the reaction to that is like, we had like a really big loss. Let's try that same strategy again.
Yeah, I mean, as ridiculous as it sounds, this is the strategy they continue to employ. They implement it, cycle after cycle. That's where they choose to put their money and put the influence behind candidates that are really Republicans. They may not be Republicans that are actively trying to pass policy that inflicts harm, but they're certainly not bringing any solutions that are going to make people's lives better or make people safer. And I think, Trump, for better or worse, right, woke a lot of people up. A lot more folks started paying attention,
Right.
and that's a great thing. But I almost feel that the structures were not in place to capitalize on that moment and educate people and bring people in and really live the values that I think the Democratic Party talks about, right? Diversity, bringing in younger folks. There really hasn't been a whole lot of effort to do those things. And so now people are paying attention because all of a sudden Donald Trump was president, and they're looking toward the party and they're saying, well, what can we do? Well, what do you mean you're not fighting for
Right.
healthcare? What do you mean you're not fighting for climate? Roe v. Wade was overturned, right?
Right.
And if you're going to continue to run these sort of lackluster milquetoast candidates that, speak in generalities, don't stand for anything, people are not excited and they're just not voting anymore. And so I think 2024
Yeah.
is going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, and I think of like, you hit kind of like the nail on the head of like this thought of New York, and how that liberal power structure is really centered in cities, because Elise Stefanik is from New York, right? California is the same thing, but like California, oh, the liberal bastion of California, but Kevin McCarthy is from California. So, um, uh, is there any race in 2024, maybe in your own backyard, that you're kind of like paying attention to and thinking like, if we were really focused, this is a seat that we could pick up? Or maybe is there a race maybe nationally that's like a really big race that you think Democrats low, we need to start investing money here now?
Look, I think that Congressional District 3, which is mine, Congressional District 4, which is even bluer, has a larger Democratic registration advantage than 3 does, which both, by the way, have more registered Democrats than they do Republicans. Those should be easy pickups if, that's the caveat, if we run the right candidates. They should be easy. We also have a couple of congressional districts upstate that should technically be ours that were flipped. So look, we know with as gerrymandering is getting more extreme, as the money that's getting poured into politics. I mean, look, even members of the Democratic Party now are starting PACs to defeat progressives, and then you have APAC and these other groups that are doing the same thing. So I think it's going to be challenging, given the terrain that we're working with. We certainly have the ability to pick up several seats just here in my state, but the question is, will we? And that I'm not I don't feel so convinced about.
Gosh. Well, now that I'm sufficiently brought down to earth,
I'm
well,
sorry.
just I also look at
Okay,
like
wait. Melanie, are you going to challenge George Santos?
I am not running again.
Oh,
I've run, as you know, I ran twice in back-to-back cycles. I unfortunately ran in probably the 2 worst years ever. I ran during COVID, this global
yeah,
pandemic. And then the second time, I don't know if you're familiar, but we had this just a complete, excuse my French, shit show in New York
the
with
redistricting.
redistricting.
Yeah,
Democrats overreached really egregiously. And the courts threw it out, and so my primary was moved. Everybody was confused. It was very difficult to run. And with the hindsight and the experience of running 2 cycles, here's what I know. Without proper funding mechanisms, it's going to get nearly impossible for progressives to win. And that's the reality that we're facing. And even really strong Democrats who, unfortunately, where I live, they're not really Democrats. They're more Republican, but good Democrats who maybe not don't identify as progressive, but are really fighting for people and families. I think they're going to have hard times because right now it's all about money. And, I sacrificed a lot to run. I have 3 children, so it's been tough, but that's not to say I'm going away. I've been organizing. I've been working with the grassroots to build out infrastructure here on Long Island. I'm involved with climate organizations. I run an LGBTQ nonprofit with my co-founders. And I just took a role that will work to achieve universal health care on the state level in New York. So I'm certainly busy, and I'm in the fight for sure. But I think we have to solve the funding mechanism issue, at least on a congressional level. I think it's possible, to get progressives on state level races, county level races, things of that nature. But on a federal level, I just think it's going to be very challenging.
yeah.
I agree. I
Go ahead,
agree. And I agree with you. And then you'll hate me for saying this, but it's
Uh-oh.
because progressives won't take all the money. Progressives are like, oh no, your
Well,
money is no
okay,
good to me.
It's a
hold on,
catch-22, huh?
hold on a second, because I so like I will say this. I will say this. That part of it is that yes, Brent is absolutely 100% right. But also there is just this. I think what I found, and this is just my personal experience, is that um, it takes like we're working from a progressive standpoint that is very grassroots,
Mhm.
and it is with when you're working at that level, it is a lot for someone who is a working class person to give you $20,
Mhm.
$50, $100. That doesn't happen. But also the other part of it, and I think that like people who are like they like casually observe politics can see a person like Bernie Sanders, who's really, to my knowledge, the only person who's been able to to really galvanize folks on a wide scale to grow a grassroots where they can fund a presidential campaign. I don't know that anybody else really, like, even AOC to an extent, right? Like, maybe she could, but I don't think that we have those types of pockets, like just regular people getting into politics, inspired by Bernie Sanders and others. We just don't have, like, our people are busy working and living and trying to make ends meet. $20 for a dozen eggs,
Yep.
it's just really hard to do. And so a lot of it is people powered, and we have these mechanisms and structures that make it really hard for people powered campaigns to do what they need to do in order to win.
When I ran, people said, "I'm not seeing your yard signs." I didn't have enough money to order 1,000 or 5,000 signs, so I
Yeah.
ordered them $100 at a time, 100 units at a time, and they were like $9 a piece. So it was like $900. But if I was ordering thousands, that would have gone way down. And then I had people saying, "You spent $900 for 100 yard signs." I'm like, "But people wanted yard signs." Like, it's the catch-22. And I wasn't the hyper progressive candidate. We all know that. And we all support each other. But it's one of those things where the grassroots thing is, that's where I'm just like, dude, if the NRA is stupid enough to give me money so I can make an order for 1,000 yard signs, then I'm going to vote against them. Take the money. Like, I understand the concept of not taking corporate and not taking whatever, but my thing was always like, hey, I have to raise money to get my name out there to let voters know what I stand for, so that then I can, go do good for the voters. And if corporations are dumb enough, that's not my problem, that's theirs. And I know there's a disagreement here, but it was just, it's a
That's
means to
what,
an end. We can't fix it. We can't fix it until we're in power enough to fix it. And your background of get money out of politics, yeah, I 100% agree. Get the money out of politics, but we're not going to be able to do that until we get there in numbers to change the rules. And it's just that's a passionate thing of mine. I don't want to play by a different set of rules than the other team. They'll take any whatever. They just openly take money from people and then vote against what they said they would do. They legislate against what they said they would do to profit those people. I won't do that. I wouldn't do that. I'm not running for anything. But I just think we need to get this mindset of, we're better than them and we're going to play by a different set of rules. We need to shut that down and say, we want a new set of rules. We're going to play by the rules we have now, and we're going to set a new set of rules. I really would like
that makes sense.
Well, I mean, hold up. It makes sense theoretically, but how many times have we heard politicians say that exact same thing only to go on and win and vote against their entire platform because Raytheon was giving them money, or Northrop Grumman was giving them money, or they'll take this bullshit in the middle approach. Well, I got some funding to clean up the bay, so therefore I'm a climate champion when the world is on fire. So
okay, Melanie, would you do that though?
Of course I wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't take the money.
Okay.
So you're a good guy, and we all know that, but I think that is not typical, right? That is not what we typically see. I've seen local politicians. There are countless examples of these folks. Look at Kirsten Sinema, right? She
oh God,
as a quasi progressive, and I think she's making $40,000 a year or something. Now she's a multimillionaire. She's flipping off the bird to anyone who looks her way. She'll take money from anybody. And I think that it's important to have that resolve. And I hear what you're saying, that how are we going to get there otherwise? But I think that government and being in DC, and if you talk to anyone who's there, and I'm sure y'all have, it is such a pressure cooker environment. So you need to go with a spine of steel, because the minute you walk into that office, they are chipping away at you. They're trying to wear you down, trying to wear you down. And I think if you start compromising before you even get there, I think it's a snowball effect. And I just want to say, because this is really interesting, right? Congress raised the maximum that you can give. Did y'all know that? So now
Yeah.
you to 3,300, but they did not raise minimum wage for regular working people, right? And this, I think I've probably said this before on the show, but when I ran, I was a grassroots candidate. We had thousands more donors than any of my opponents. They had hundreds of thousands of dollars more than I had, because all they had to do was call up their friend. Can you double max? Can you double max? Can you double max? You don't need that many of them to quickly amass $1 million. But I don't have those friends. Like, my friends were scraping together to give me $20 every month if they could. And that was a lot, So I think the bigger thing is not how do we get in the mud with them on the money thing. I think it's about figuring out how to educate the public on passing real campaign finance reform and getting publicly funded elections, which of course was in HR 1, which, Joe Manchin, was championing. He was a sponsor of, and as soon as we had the House and the Senate, he's like, oh, whoa, just kidding, got you, right? And that's the problem too, that even the folks that pretend to be on our side aren't. But to me, that's the fix. And I do think people are becoming wiser to that fact. But if we can go back to George Santos for a second, like, he's an international joke, a huge embarrassment, a huge stain on our government. But you know what? I see all these folks organizing, we're going to write postcards to ask, congressional members to expel him. It's never going to happen. And bless their hearts.
Yeah, they're not going to do it.
The energy is great. But if you want to prevent George Santos from being elected again, and the next George Santos, because he laid out the plan, go be charismatic, lie through your teeth. They're not going to check, and you can win. Take money from everybody, break the law, which is what he's done. So if we want to prevent him from winning and the next George Santos, we need campaign finance. We need to educate folks on that.
No, I agree. I just think that we need to stop with the playing by two sets of rules. That's the part that bothers me personally. And I'm not a hyper progressive. I just was trying to be realistic. Like, how do I get there to help? And I was willing to go and lay it all out on one term. And unfortunately, had I stayed in, had I won, this wouldn't have been the one term to lay it all out on, being as though the Democrats have no control. I mean, I could have made noise, but wouldn't have, gotten the reforms we need. But we need people that are willing to go there for one term, and the cinemas and the whatevers that are, bring her in, but Boebert, like, they went in with no money and they're now multimillionaires. That's a problem. When I ran, I did the funding math on my wife and I and family's budget and the time away and how much it costs to live in DC, and said, okay, this I can do good for people. We'll be a little bit better off than me as a house husband, but most of the money is going to burn up in taxes and in cost of living in DC, but we'll be better off after everything, and we'll do some good for people. But that's what we need to look for in elected officials. Ones that this whole I'm going to go to DC and get rich thing is absolutely disgusting. So, well, get money out of politics, but we got to get power first.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I think so. Let me just say two things. First, the money. I think you can do both, right? I think you can take like a really personal stand to say, like, you know what, I personally I this developer I know is a POS,
Mhm.
and they run a bunch of slums. I'm not going to take their money. This other person who's also a developer, we've had conversations. They're very open to what I want to enact and what my plan is and things that I'm doing. Sure, I'll take their money. You can do that. So you don't have to like, but there's some stuff. I just think there are some things that like the NRA. That's a hard pass. It's a hard pass for me.
Okay, I understand, but
I know, I
my
know,
point
I know.
my point is that so I'm from Washington State, and it's been a theme in Washington State politics on the federal level that Boeing Corporation will
Mm.
give a
Microsoft.
max donation to every candidate on the general ballot. So they're going to give 10,000 to the other person. They're going to give 10,000 to you because that's their corporate max, the way it funnels. I don't see the reason to say, I'm going to let them give the other person 10,000 to battle me with, and I'm going to reject their $10,000. I understand your Raytheon statement, but when the companies are like, we don't have a player in this, we just want to say we were supportive and we're going to throw money at every candidate, great.
Yeah,
But that's where I say, okay, Boeing, you know what? When they were going through their 737 MAX debacle last year and they needed to get review, I actually knew about that and was petitioning to say, hey, you guys need to whatever. But I'm also an aviation geek and say, hey, you need to stop revising your planes and comply with the newer situation of code. And your next plane needs to be up to the newer
up to
version.
the standard.
And
Yeah,
I wouldn't vote in favor of allowing them to revive the 767 or going out in the weeds here. So it's just a matter of I just think we need candidates who are who they say they are, and then back that up by by a voting record, and then we need an informed public that says, "Hey, you said this to me when you were at my door, but then you did that." And sorry, don't knock on my door again
yeah,
and look for somebody else.
that's too much on the public. I just,
Well,
I know. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that, that people shouldn't do that, but let me get to this question here that said, "What do you guys think of consolidating campaign efforts?"
Um, in terms of on a slate, is that I assume?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
assume that kind of.
I generally think it's a good idea. I think it gets challenging if you don't share the same values as the folks on the slate. You know, where I'm from, we, as I said earlier, we often get a lot of Republicans running on the Democratic line. They'd be a Republican nearly anywhere else, and I not like a, as I said, not like a harm-producing Republican, but a Republican. And sometimes it's really hard to advocate for someone who you know is actively causing harm or standing against marginalized and oppressed people. And so I personally have a very low tolerance for that. I think if you've got a progressive slate or even a true Democratic slate, I say go for it. I think it can be really helpful because campaigns are really hard, and if you can trust those other folks on the slate, it does make things easier. But I'll give you a quick example. There was a gentleman who, and I use that term lightly, I guess, who ran in my primary last cycle, who literally introduced, he's a Nassau County legislator, which is the county I live in. He introduced a bill to allow both retired police officers and active police officers to sue protesters for up to $50,000 with irrefutable presumption. So that basically means that this was like at the height of Black Lives Matter, as it was sort of kind of calming down. But what that meant was that a protester could be marching in the street And if a police officer felt harassed or threatened by a protester who might have been just chanting, they could sue with irrefutable presumption. Needless to say, our state attorney general, threw it out. But this person runs as a Democrat. This person is running for Congress in my district again. And to me, I'm like, I don't know, who would I rather have? That's saying something. Would I rather have George Santos or this absolute liar?
I'd rather have Melanie. I'd rather have Melanie get out
Yeah.
there and go whoop him again, and then go whoop George Santos.
That's what I think, but
And the person that the obvious front runner and Melanie would obviously get some national airtime, and that might change that whole thing, and we might get some more $5 and $10 grassroots donations.
I'm just saying. But think about it. So let's go ahead and kind of pivot here to our panel discussion this week, because what's his name? Sue Chu, who is the CEO of TikTok, was in a congressional hearing this week. And I don't know about you guys, but I think the hearing was 5 hours. I watched probably 2.5 of it because I was driving back from Sacramento. I had nothing else to do, so I have MSNBC in the Sirius XM, so I had it on anyway. So I listened to quite a bit of it, and I think it just really kind of highlighted Congress's own failure to protect privacy, right? It had the air of when we were having that net neutrality debate going on in the country, and members of Congress not even knowing what it is. We were at that level. So I think what I want to start off talking about today is what did you guys think came out of the hearing? Like, what was your overall kind of take on this hearing? Is Congress actually worried about our privacy, or is there, like my belief, something more nefarious going on with, and just TikTok is just the vehicle, but they want to attack social media in general?
Well, look, we do know, right, that Congress does have backdoors to U.S.-based social media companies, right? So, I mean, I think there's, some consideration here is this happening now because they don't have that same backdoor to TikTok because it's not an American-owned company. But I also, and I don't disagree that, maybe there is some attack on social media. Maybe it is about protecting their power in a way, because really social media has been a wonderful vehicle for progressive challengers. And even though they don't often win statistically, they are really changing the game and educating folks. Unfortunately, this change is happening slower than we need and require. But make no mistake, every time a progressive runs, we are changing the narrative, right? So it could be somewhat a defensive play. But I would also say, I think it's indicative of this very large problem that we all know exists in Congress. And I don't mean to sound ageist, because I love Bernie, I love Elizabeth Warren, I love folks that are, with it and understand and really in it for the right reasons. But, a lot of Congress tends to be in an older age demographic, and they don't understand. And I think this is what was brought to light, in the TikTok hearings. Like, many of the members didn't really understand Wi-Fi. They didn't really understand
God.
right? So
oh my goodness.
And I think that just shows the real importance of having a wide breadth of representation in Congress, right? Everyone can't be 80 years old. Old and white and wealthy, they're representing one perspective of America. And we need to diversify in a major way. The problem lies in the money, right? There are amazing candidates everywhere you look. There would be amazing folks that could represent and fight for us. But I think, to me, that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, that was a really great point to highlight that. I was damn sure he was about to say Wi-Fi. When he was like, and this connects to the Wi-Fi, and you can get on. Can you set my alarm my phone from being on TikTok with the Wi-Fi. It was just way out of context. And then it also was kind of a little bit of a show, right? They like a lot of Republicans really just kind of wanted to be up there to bash this guy and not actually let him respond to questions. And like as far as like the concern, so I'm back to being. I was taking a hiatus of being salty on social media, but now that like too much is going on, and I just have to.
Needs a little
It,
flavor.
so I replied back to the questioning that Kat Kamek, the congresswoman from I was going to say the great state of Florida, but the semi okay state of Florida. Uh, was berating the CEO of TikTok about leaked user data. And I was just thinking to myself, let me just do a quick Google search. In 5 seconds of putting leaked data, social media, all of these articles came up, and come to find out, like Facebook was fined $270 million for leaking user data.
Hmm.
And all the questions about, well, this is this Chinese company, it's a Chinese company. Facebook was giving user data to a Chinese company that U.S. intelligence agencies had identified was not was a malicious act. And then it's just, but hey, people are saying mean things on TikTok. That was the takeaway from a lot of the hearings is they were saying mean things about Republicans, and we don't like that.
Yes. Well, I think also, right, there younger folks are drawn to, I mean, and TikTok, certainly there's still younger folks, but these newer iterations of social media, right? It's the youth that are really become experts. And I would imagine, having a platform that can educate and really influence young folks in such a major way is terrifying to these politicians, right? Because we know we need young folks to vote, right? I think there are many groups working on it. We need to do a better job. But imagine if we could harness that power. I mean, I sometimes want to rip my hair out because I look at Congress, and I have 3 kids. They're 12, 8, and 6. And I look at our government, and it doesn't matter whatever level, if it's state, county, town, federal, and the climate crisis is the existential crisis of our time. 100%. There are a lot of things wrong. There's a lot of things we can talk about. But if we don't fix that, almost nothing else matters, because we're never going to fix everything if we don't address the climate crisis. And Congress is just sitting there saying a big fuck you to every young person who's going to deal with the consequences. It is so hard to take Republicans and Democrats both seriously when they sit there and rail against, the southern border and immigration. Like, you're doing nothing to address the climate crisis. That bothers you? Wait until we get the mass migrations. Wait until the famine comes, the water insecurity, the wars.
We have water insecurity. We have it in Arizona. We have it in California, and we'll see what happens to California this year. And while the massive rains and the massive snowfall that is going to help the state of California is good, I'm waiting for the Republican talking points of, look, see, this happens, and look, it's all normal again. But we, all 3 of us, know that this isn't going to fix anything. It's going to be a good water year, and then policies will be enacted that will mishandle it, then they'll hold it back, and they'll still not have enough for the agriculture, and then they'll dump it later and so we know what we're walking into. And I agree with you, the climate is the existential crisis, but people that haven't looked into it do not and will not understand that. And that's, unfortunately, that's where I am into spin and everything else of, let's talk about the issues these people want to talk about, while the core issue is fixing the climate. because if we don't, we're dead. And, my thing was tying everything back to healthcare. Gun violence is a healthcare epidemic. The climate dying kills us all. That's a healthcare problem. But talking about healthcare, and so do we have another water pollution thing in Philadelphia today? I
Yeah.
do not know about
There
that,
was,
but
Philadelphia temporarily shut down their water system from a spill.
and this is an EPA issue. This is Republicans rolling back regulations issue that is harming the environment. So these things happen, and we need to go to solar and wind, and we need to find a new version of batteries that isn't lithium based, so that we can store energy. Because the sad part is they're right when they're like, oh, well, what happens at night when the sun isn't out? Well, we have to have stored the energy so people can turn on their lights at night. But we need to find a sustainable way to do that. And I believe that with innovation and investment, we absolutely can. I don't see why we can't.
Well, we do have that technology. It's not that if the sun isn't out, it doesn't work, right? I mean, it's solar.
I know that, but
so, but I think, more to the point is that it's not just one thing, much like it's an ecosystem, right? Much like
Yeah.
our globe is. And it's not just addressing water quality or big agriculture. It's all of it. It's public transportation. It's green public transportation. It's green housing. It's all of these things together that are interwoven and interconnected. So, I think that the Green New Deal infrastructure, the framework, is so important, but it seems almost as if folks are like, yeah, I support the Green New Deal. Cool. And it doesn't go anywhere. And I know there's been a little bit of movement. There was a Green New Deal for schools, a Green New Deal for housing. But we need to really develop that in a much, much larger way. And we've got to do a better job of connecting these issues for folks, because it's not happening. And what I'm focused on right now locally, we're trying to push my town and my county to put together a plan. And I'm like obsessed with, I don't know if you all have been to Atlanta, but they have really incredible goals for cutting their emissions to zero. But they've developed this. It's essentially a park. It's a loop. It's public transportation. It's called the Beltline, and they have linked cultural aspects, arts, entertainment, food, affordable housing, expansion of parks into this 22-mile loop, and it's really brought the city together where housing used to be at one end or the other. It's really created this cohesive ecosystem, if you will. And I think it's a really good model for cities and counties alike, because obviously the federal government is doing very little, in protecting our future. So I'm excited and I'm hopeful that, folks at the, lower levels of government will start to create that within their own towns and cities.
Yeah. To kind of bring this into focus back to the hearing.
I'm cutting you off.
Okay.
Melanie just brought up the crown jewel of points, which is our state and local elections are so important, and federal elections are very important. But what's going on at your school board? What's going on as your mayor and your city council? What's going on with your county council, your legislative district, and at your state level really is the meat and potatoes that impacts your lives. Like, we need federal legislation to fix this overturning of Roe v. Wade. We need federal legislation to enact true gun reform. We need federal legislation to move us towards universal health care. But at the end of the day, the education your kids get, your police response and how the police interact with the end, I want to say end user, but the citizens, those are all city and local policy, and absolutely getting the right person in for those positions is of dire importance. Sorry to cut you off, Lauren.
No, no,
Go.
no, no. That's great.
Oh,
Very,
Lauren
very
Hubbard for
important.
mayor. Sorry, forgot to say it.
uh, but so just getting back to the conversation around this hearing and social media companies in general, I think we talked about it earlier and how money influences how these things go, and I think TikTok is just on the receiving end of this congressional hearing as the whipping post because a lot of members of Congress, a lot of Republican members of Congress who were in there doing their attacking, have received money from Meta, Facebook's parent company,
Mhm.
right? And the things that they are accusing TikTok of doing, you know, have nothing to say about the company that's doing the same thing that's giving them money, right? So that's part to kind of connect that to our conversation earlier. Dan Crenshaw gets money from Meta, and he was in that hearing, trying to do his best on TikTok. And to Melanie's point, it is kind of a tool for young people to tell other young people and get them informed about elections. And I think that is probably the most dangerous thing about it is we've never had a tool to organize people at scale and at the level that social media allows us to do, and at this, I won't say cheaply, but at such a minor cost that it is pretty threatening if your whole if your whole political agenda is telling your folks, we want freedom, 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 freedom from the government, but then end up when you get in office legislating everything else that people can't do.
Mhm.
That's what this is to me. So like and now this congressional hearing, but also we've seen legislation pass. Utah this week just passed what they call the Social Media Regulation Act, signed by their governor, um, taking away and wanting to highlight individuals and taking away their freedom of speech and freedom of privacy, which is ironic because that was what the whole hearing was about.
Well, I just want to chime in with one point too, because I know you're talking about Meta giving money to the Republicans. I think Meta gave something like $20 million this year, but interestingly, the majority of that goes to Democrats. So
Oh yeah,
you know,
oh yeah.
yeah, so I and it's an overwhelming majority goes to Democrats. So I think this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. We really need folks to stand in their values, and this is why I feel so strongly. And it's okay, Brent. I get your how you feel about it, but they're currying favor. That's what they're doing, and let us not forget that Meta isn't doing very well, and now they're creating these essentially copycat mechanisms because TikTok is succeeding and frankly beating them at their own game. So that plays into this too. We've got to recognize that it's not just that, oh well, maybe it's everything. Maybe if they want to squash the public using this really incredibly powerful tool to disseminate information. Of course, they didn't care so much when, what is it? The Analytica, what was that called? Trump's, where they were.
Oh,
Oh
Cambridge
yeah,
Analytica.
Yeah, I was like, it's
Analytica.
keeping me. When Cambridge Analytica was manipulating people, that was just fine. But
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of everything. And I do think we have to explore that, hey, look, Meta's giving them a lot of money to squash a competitor. And that happens all the time in DC. And that's what's happening right now.
Okay, I'm sorry to jump onto my own bandwagon here. I put out a tweet the other day. I don't know if Melanie, you've seen the same thing, or Lauren, but I got a blue check mark because on Twitter because I was running for office. I had the requisite media coverage and everything else, and I got a thing the other day that was like, "Hey, keep your blue check mark. Click here if you're an individual or click here, or if you're an organization, and because we're going to get rid of the legacy check marks on April 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And my very first instinct was, I am a reproductive care activist. Um, and I was like, okay, yeah, there's no way you're getting a penny from me. And I'm going to go donate monthly to Planned Parenthood instead of giving Twitter money. I'm not going to give money to Twitter. But it was kind of chilling later when I thought about it. And I'm like, I did that and I made kind of a bunch of stink about it. But then I'm like, wait a second. They're now saying if you pay $8, you're valid. If you don't, you're not. And I was like, this is from the free speech guy and the free speech group. This now you have to pay to speak. Like, I never got
to be a credible voice, right?
Yeah.
That's what it used to be, about being a credible voice.
And that what we said came from us,
Mhm.
and that we had to account for, oh no, that wasn't the secondary Brent Henrich that made an account yesterday that said that. No, that's the Brent Henrich account that said that we verified was Brent Henrich looking at his passport, looking at his ID, looking at these things that made it so I am accountable for what I say, and what I say people can push back on. And now it's like, okay, so I'm not going to be verified anymore. But Joe Schmo that went and got a prepaid Visa can put $8 down and he's all of a sudden verified, and the public is unaware. They don't understand that on April 1st, 500,000 verified accounts are going to disappear, and that, and again, that's social media. That's that feeds into this TikTok narrative. Like, we are going to lose that thing that says we are who we are unless we pay. But right now, paying is a joke, because you look at people, you're like, okay, you have a paid $8 a month Twitter check mark. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know what TikTok does for that, but I do know what Facebook does. I do know what Spoutable does. I'm looking at these things going, this matters and is important. And it goes back to the social media being able to spread your information, because we know there's accounts out there with millions of followers that just spread disinformation. It's, yeah, sorry, I'll stop saying and I'll be quiet.
Oh, Lauren, you're on mute.
Hear me? I'm, wanting to make sure I cut down on my background noise. Really funny story and about that very process, and I'll kind of, we'll kind of wrap this up and bring it full circle. So there was a story in a local, it's not a newspaper, but it's like a local online news publication. And they kind of have a reputation for being a little more right wing. But they posted about a um, colleague of mine, I guess colleague, contemporary. I don't know. I don't, like, we haven't hung out personally, but we're on the board of this Central Valley Progressive. Anyway, and he's a former congressional candidate, Phil Arbaio. Brent, you know Phil.
Yeah.
He apparently, the story was they were using, he sold, or he claims to have sold a old Twitter account to another person, but that Twitter account is now a pornography producer, and so they, like, the Sun Times went through and like tracked it down and said, "Hey, this is Phil Arbaio's account. Phil Arbaio is now producing porn. He's doing Congress and porn." So it was like a really wild story reading that earlier this week about like what,
See,
which I'm not mad at. I'm like, hey, you got to make a living out here. Life is rough. If
I
I could, if
life is
people wanted
rough.
to see me on OnlyFans, I would have one.
Hey, more power to you, I'd say. I when Elon Musk took over Twitter, I really sort of struggled with, well, is he like really just trying to wash the public's voice, or is he just really that bad at business? And I think maybe he's just that bad, because he's just totally tanked it, and it's really unfortunate. Um, we all know Twitter can sometimes be a cesspool, but it could also be an amazing place for connection. And I think the progressive community in particular has really thrived on Twitter. So it's really sad, and it's unfortunate, and it's probably purposeful. But my husband and I keep joking that, because I have a blue check at least for the next week or so, I suppose. But they're taking them away, and the pay model goes into effect on April 1st, and we're like, oh, it's because Twitter's now a joke, right? It's April Fool's Day, so it's really it's just, I'm actually very sad about it. I just, the whole thing is awful, and I mean it makes me think about even a public social media space, and maybe that's the future, right, to protect this, because social media has become such a huge part of our lives, for young people. I mean, it's all they know. And if Elon Musk could really, tank this platform that connects millions of people around the globe in a matter of weeks, that's a danger to society in general. So I think, a public type of shared space for folks might be, the way to go.
Right. And I just like, part of me is like, with the whole question, the talking back and forth about Section 230 in its relation to these platforms not being sued for what people post on them.
Hmm.
I understand that, right? We're like having this public forum where we're letting people exercise their freedom of speech. Um, I don't. I personally don't think that this company should be held responsible for someone else's speech. So I understand that to a certain extent. The other thing with this in this social media thing that we live under, is this like thought that Trump or other public officials can't should have a should have a social media account. I don't think they should. I mean, it would be if they're trying to do their job and get input from their constituents, sure. But I don't think they have to have one. I
Hmm.
think if you violate the rules of the terms and conditions, that you should not have one.
Hmm.
So I don't think Trump should get his back. And I'm just kind of the same. I'm at a it irks me because like the same kind of things that we're talking about is the same thing that organizers used for like the January 6th rally,
Hmm.
and like how much can we hold this accountable, um you know in using these spaces to organize, even if the event is not for a is for a nefarious purpose,
Hmm.
right? So as we kind of close out, I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a little bit about where you see, like, how we'll have this be our last thought of where you see um, this conversation going at large. Do you think this is something? I think this is something that young people are going to just it's going to activate them to like. I feel like Gen Z is pretty tuned in, but even more so now that they're like, okay, now I was like voting before, but now I'm getting all of my friends to do it too. Where do you see kind of this conversation uh, going in spaces in our own houses with our friends and things like that for young people?
Look, I think that it will anger a lot of young folks, right? And understandably so. But as I said, earlier, I really would like to see us move toward some type of public social media so we can protect it. And I hear what you're saying, about, holding entities accountable and whatnot. I don't necessarily think the folks that organized, to have an insurrection at the Capitol, right? I don't think that is necessarily, the responsibility of the social media entity to have discovered that. However, I do think when folks do violate the rules and you reported, that's a different story. But I agree with you. I think we've got to be careful, knowing that our world is not all good or all bad. We can't just take something away because one terrible thing happened, which was awful. But I don't think that's what it is. So I would like to see us move toward that. But I'll go. It's interesting. I feel like this conversation is coming full circle now because young people are becoming so disengaged with our politics because they understand that the system is rigged against them. They understand that these systems of oppression were designed this way. And so, something like this, I think makes that worse, honestly. And I don't know, maybe that's good for the folks in office, but I I think it makes it worse. I think they look at government now and say, you're not doing anything to help me get a job. You're not doing anything to save the environment. Healthcare costs, they never knew they were exorbitant, but if they're getting their first job or second job, they know it now.
Right.
Our government minimum wages are stagnant, right? So life is not improving for young people. And depending what stage of life you're at, you kind of realize you have different realizations at these different steps. So I don't honestly know if it would cause folks to energize. I think they might become more disengaged.
I hope not. Young people get in there. But someone asked me, like, hey, do you guys think millennials will ever have a midlife crisis? And I thought to myself, what does it mean to have a midlife crisis? To have like this kind of income where I can buy something that I couldn't afford when I was
Like a
younger, and I'm
donut,
thinking,
maybe like you get a donut or avocado
we're going from crisis to crisis. I don't see a midlife one happening.
toast.
I hope to make it to midlife to to find out, but it does. The way things are going.
Well, that's what it is.
Um,
Life is so much harder to live now. It's you can't work a full-time job and own a residence, go on a vacation, buy a TV. These are not things that young families and young people can afford anymore. And I think that there is a great disconnect between, folks that are retired who really enjoy these benefits and they don't understand why young people are struggling, right? But everything is expensive, as you mentioned. Eggs is so expensive, right? They
we went to
can't
Chicago. It cost $25 to fly to Chicago from California for a family of four.
$25.
$2,500.
Oh, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh. That used to be like, I used to be able to take, well, like even pre-pandemic, we went to Disney World for that.
yeah,
Like our flights and the stay.
yeah.
It's just crazy. But
It's
Melanie, I
wild.
want to thank you for coming on and joining us this week. And if you have not thought about, I'm sure you've thought about it, and other people have asked you about it, and I you got to
Please
do
run
what you got to
again.
do. But I'm just I think it's going to be a little different time this time. But
Well, I appreciate the support. As I said, I'm still in the fight. We're working really hard to bring about change in different ways. Fighting it from a different angle right now.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we hope that you join us next week here on. This has been Lauren and Brent with our guest Melanie from New York. Thank you so much, guys, for watching, and we'll see you next time.